Coming into 2019, the only core member of the Death Patrol who wasn't locked up was Makalele, aka Maka, who had recently completed his sentence for the firearm offence. Even though the prosecutor reportedly wanted him jailed immediately after the filmed assault of Jafar, even with all of that on camera, once again, there was seemingly not enough evidence to actually convict him. After getting out, Makalele begun gathering the remaining Death Patrol members, who had largely formed the younger generation of the Yerva boys that the core Death Patrol members had recruited, who were also going by the name the Hulster Children. This included people like Makalele's little brother AZ and his friends Panda and Abe, who idolized the older guys in the gang and wanted to replicate their gangster image in the streets. However, with many of the main people from both sides of the war being out of the picture, for a moment it seemed like things may have cooled down a little bit. In March, Shobra is released from jail after the police failed to tie him to the large drug bust that took down Musa and Talak. Sometime after, he seemingly returns to Spain to maintain his connections down there. Even with all of the police attention, the members of both of these gangs were global and seemingly able to move between borders freely. Unfortunately, this would mean the downfall for certain members on both sides. As in June 2019, Yasin's manager Faye, aka Frankie, travels to Denmark together with two other Shotters members, Gucci and Hoods, with the apparent aim of meeting local people there from the rap music business. In reality, it would turn out that they had been tricked by Makalele and his crew, who end up ambushing the trio at a parking lot in Herlev, a suburb on the outskirts of Denmark's capital, Copenhagen. Makan and his crew would begin shooting at their car with an automatic rifle and handguns. Faye and Hoods would take off running, and Hoods is able to escape unharmed, but Faye would be hit in the thigh, beginning to bleed profusely while running away from the shooters. He would jump into a bush and hide there, managing to get away from the shooters who returned to their car. There, Gucci, who was unable to escape, would fall into the grass near the car with severe gunshot wounds. At that point, a man runs back to the car and returns fire with an automatic rifle, shooting Gucci over a dozen times more from close distance, killing him on the spot, whilst another attacker filmed it. After the shooting, the Death Patrol members can be seen on video jumping into their car and speeding off from the scene, leaving Gucci's body on the ground to be found by police, whilst Faye is bleeding out nearby, later passing away from his injuries. Their getaway car would later be found intact after an unsuccessful attempt to light it on fire. Now, the failure to burn this car that was used in the murder would turn out to be a costly mistake, providing the Danish investigators ample DNA evidence. A few days later, the Denmark police would get a tip that one of the shooters is hiding in an apartment in the city of Aarhus, around 3 hours away from the crime scene. And there, they end up catching up with none other than Makalele, who is filmed by a bystander whilst attempting to avoid the capture by hanging from a balcony. 4 weeks later, the other suspects would all be caught back in Stockholm, Sweden, at which point they were swiftly extradited back to Denmark, beginning a long wait for trial. The Death Patrol at this point had been written about in the media for several years, but the shocking events in Denmark cemented their notoriety in the media. In a country where such gangster celebrities were a relatively new phenomenon, the discourse would sometimes reach bizarre levels. For example, this insane column would be written that pondered whether the Gucci brand had some kind of responsibility to act and condemn members of the Death Patrol who often dressed in the designer brand. When it finally came time for the trial and sentencing, the Death Patrol members would find out just how bad they messed up by crossing the border to commit these murders. Denmark has been much quicker to act with regards to their own gang problems, and the country would have much harsher penalties for these gangsters than Sweden, with law in certain cases allowing the sentence to be doubled if the crime is proven to be gang-related. In the end, Makan and the two other older members would end up getting life sentences, whilst two younger guys, who were still both 17 years old at the time of the crime, would end up getting 20 years each. In Sweden, the younger members, or 100 guys, would have likely received much more lenient sentences, typically 3 or 4 years in a youth home. However, as of 2022, due to these laws that prevented underage people from getting serious prison time, Swedish laws are now being rewritten due to the exploitation of these young offenders as hitmen. However, even in Denmark, the sentences of the youngest members made history by being the first sentences of that length being given to underage offenders. This set a clear example for other gangsters to think twice before bringing their armed conflicts across their borders. However, after an appeal, the youngsters' sentences were eventually lowered to 16 years, but still, this is multiples more than they would have received had they done the murders in Sweden. Unfortunately, even these sentences haven't been enough to stop the gang from further operating in Denmark, and the Danish news would go on to report that the Death Squad had actually built official alliances with local gang sets there. But for now, it seemed that Sweden's most dangerous gangsters had been taken off the streets, funnily enough, thanks to the Danish authorities. However, naturally, this wouldn't be the end of the warfare, and moving forward, the remaining members of the Shotters and the Death Patrol would continue their bloody campaign for Get Back.